It happened during a high-profile naval symposium, where ranks and medals filled the room more than oxygen itself. Admiral Blackwood called her out publicly, questioning her record with a sneer that encouraged others to join his mockery. Commander Hayes stood silent as laughter rippled through the audience of decorated officers. "So tell us, Commander, who exactly is Echo 7? He demanded with a smirk. Before she could respond, every screen in the room flashed blue, and a computerized voice cut through the speakers. "Echo 7 online." The Admiral's security badge suddenly flashed red as classified mission logs with her signature appeared on every screen. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you appreciate stories of quiet excellence finally recognized, please consider subscribing. The room of laughing officers was about to witness the end of an admiral's career and the revelation of a legend. Commander Meridell Hayes arrived exactly 45 minutes early for the annual Naval Strategic Command Symposium. The massive auditorium at Norfolk Naval Base still stood half empty, staff making final preparations for the day's events. She moved with quiet efficiency through security, credentials already in order, no questions asked or needed. Unlike many officers who would arrive later with entourages and carefully crafted entrances, Meridell simply appeared, signed in, and took her assigned seat without fanfare. Her uniform was impeccable, dress blues perfectly pressed, every element precisely to regulation. Yet, compared to most who would fill this room, her chest carried remarkably few decorations. An observer might notice this absence more than what was present, like a night sky with conspicuously empty spaces where stars should be. As the room gradually filled, the atmosphere transformed. Uniforms adorned with ribbons and medals created a tapestry of achievement and status. Admirals and captains greeted each other with practiced camaraderie, exchanging firm handshakes and knowing glances. Junior officers hovered at the edges, eager to be noticed by the right superior. Through it all, Meridell remained seated, reviewing materials on her secure tablet, an island of stillness in the growing sea of motion. The whispers started soon enough. "Who is she?" A lieutenant commander nudged his colleague, nodding discreetly toward Meridell. "Hayes, I think, some administrative officer from Naval Intelligence," his companion replied with a dismissive wave. "Probably here to take notes." "Then why is she sitting in the command section?" The question hung unanswered as more officers filed in. A young lieutenant passing by glanced at Meridell, his expression flickering with something like recognition, before quickly averting his eyes when she looked up. The brief exchange went unnoticed by most, but not by Captain Eladio Mercer, who observed from across the room with careful neutrality. At precisely 0900, Admiral Thorsten Blackwood strode onto the stage. Silver-haired and imposing in his 60s, his chest gleamed with medals that caught the light with each movement. His reputation preceded him, politically connected, ambitious, and known for a leadership style that rewarded loyalty above competence. Those who earned his favor thrived. Those who challenged him rarely lasted long. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the annual Naval Strategic Command Symposium," Blackwood began, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "For those new to our gathering, this is where we shape the future of our naval forces, where strategy meets reality." He proceeded to introduce key naval figures with elaborate praise and personal anecdotes, each introduction longer and more glowing than the last. When he reached the end of his prepared remarks, his eyes fell on Meridell, and he paused, squinting slightly at his notes. And Commander Hayes, Naval Intelligence. The brevity stood in stark contrast to his previous introductions, his tone suggesting an afterthought rather than a proper acknowledgement. He moved immediately to the next name, but the message had been sent. Commander Hayes did not belong in this echelon. If Meridell noticed the slight, her expression revealed nothing. She remained perfectly composed, her focus on the proceedings rather than the politics. Across the room, Captain Mercer's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. A brief tell quickly mastered. The morning session progressed through presentations on naval readiness and strategic priorities. Each speaker offered safe, politically astute assessments that challenged nothing and risked less. The audience nodded appreciatively at appropriate intervals, the ritual familiar to all involved. When the panel discussion on future maritime security challenges began after the coffee break, 5 senior officers took their places at the front. Maridel, included apparently as an administrative necessity, was seated at the far end of the table. The moderator, a rear admiral with diplomatic skill, guided the conversation through predictable channels until, almost as an afterthought, he turned to Maridel. "Commander Hayes, your thoughts on emerging security challenges?" The room shifted slightly, attention turning to this unknown quantity with minimal expectations. Maridel leaned forward, her voice clear and measured. "Our current Strait of Malacca protocols assume conventional threats, but overlook coordinated cyber-physical attacks targeting navigational systems," she began, her analysis precise and concrete. "Recent exercises demonstrated vulnerabilities that could be exploited to funnel shipping traffic into ambush zones, while simultaneously disabling emergency response capabilities." A subtle ripple moved through the audience. The assessment was not just insightful, but contained details that suggested first-hand knowledge many in the room didn't possess. More significantly, it directly contradicted points made earlier by two of Admiral Blackwood's protégés. In the back row, a retired admiral with weathered features nodded slowly, recognition flickering across his face. Near the front, Admiral Blackwood's expression darkened almost imperceptibly. "Interesting theory, Commander," the moderator responded, clearly unprepared for substantive analysis. "Perhaps we should move on to—" "Actually," Admiral Blackwood interrupted, rising slightly from his seat, "I'd like to hear more about Commander Hayes' assessment. Perhaps she could explain her rather unique perspective on tactical operations in the region." The phrasing, courteous on the surface but laced with skepticism, transformed the moment into a challenge. The room temperature seemed to drop a few degrees as all eyes turned back to Maridel. "Of course, Admiral," she replied evenly. "The vulnerability emerges from our separation of cyber and physical security protocols. During Exercise Trident Shield last year, Red Team demonstrated that compromising just 3 systems could create a cascading failure across regional response networks. The after-action report recommended integration of countermeasures, but implementation has been delayed due to jurisdictional questions between 5th and 7th Fleets. Her response contained no criticism, just facts. Yet the facts themselves formed an indictment of command decisions. More unsettling to many present was her casual reference to classified exercise results that few in the room should have had access to. Admiral Blackwood's smile thinned. "Impressive recall, Commander. Though I believe you're overstating the findings. These theoretical vulnerabilities hardly constitute an emergency." "I didn't suggest they did, Admiral, but addressing them now would be considerably less expensive than addressing them after exploitation." The exchange continued through the Q&A session, with Blackwood repeatedly returning to Maridel with increasingly pointed questions. Each time, she responded with precise data and measured analysis, neither backing down nor escalating the clear tension. For those paying attention, it became a fascinating display of power dynamics. Blackwood with all the formal authority, Maridel with unexpected and unexplained expertise. As the moderator finally called for a lunch break, Maridel glanced down at her secure tablet, which had silently notified her of an incoming message. The screen displayed 4 words that caused the first crack in her composed exterior. "Vigilance Protocol Active." She dismissed the notification with a subtle tap, her eyes scanning the room as if searching for something or someone. The symposium participants filed out for lunch, conversations buzzing with the unexpected tension from the morning session. Maridel remained seated a moment longer, her stillness at odds with the movement around her, like a rock in a flowing stream. The officers' mess had been transformed for the symposium, white tablecloths and naval emblems creating a formal dining atmosphere. Maridel selected a small table near the wall, positioning herself with clear sightlines to both entrances. She ate methodically while observing the social dynamics playing out around her, the careful orbits of junior officers around senior ones, the subtle power plays and seating arrangements, the exclusions and inclusions that defined naval hierarchy. 2 captains at a nearby table were engaged in animated conversation, their voices carrying just enough for Maridel to catch fragments. Remarkable operation, though, wasn't it? Poseidon's shadow pulled those submariners out when everyone thought they were lost. The extraction protocol was brilliant. Heard it was designed by Echo 7. "Echo 7 doesn't exist," the first captain replied, with the confidence of insider knowledge. "Just a designation they use for joint operations too classified to attribute properly." No single person could have orchestrated all those operations. Maridel's eyes flickered momentarily at the mention, but she revealed nothing, continuing her meal with the same measured pace. The captain's conversation drifted to other topics, unaware of their observer. "Commander Hayes." The voice came from beside her table. Captain Eladio Mercer stood there, his weathered features composed into a neutral expression that revealed nothing to casual observers. "Captain Mercer," Maridel acknowledged, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "Please." Mercer sat with the careful movement of someone conscious of being watched. "Unexpected to see you in such a public setting." "Orders," she replied simply. "From whom?" His question carried genuine curiosity. "That's above both our pay grades, I'm afraid." A hint of warmth colored her response, suggesting a professional relationship beyond this encounter. Mercer nodded, accepting the boundary. He leaned forward slightly, voice lowered. "Blackwood is gunning for you. He's pulled your file." Maridel's expression didn't change, but her fingers stilled momentarily on her water glass. "Recently?" "Yesterday. Expedited request." "On what authority?" "That's what concerns me," Mercer replied, his eyes briefly scanning the room before returning to hers. "He shouldn't have been able to access it at all, much less expedite the request." Maridel absorbed this information, calculations running behind her composed exterior. "Which file?" she finally asked, her voice low but sharp. Mercer's expression shifted to concern as he glanced at her secure tablet. "All of them. He's been granted temporary cobalt clearance." For the first time, Maridel's composure cracked, just slightly. A momentary widening of her eyes. "That's not possible. Who authorized it?" "Someone who doesn't know what they've just done." Mercer stood, adjusting his uniform with practiced precision. "Watch your back this afternoon, Commander. This isn't just about professional rivalry anymore." As he walked away, Maridel's hand moved to her tablet, accessing security protocols not typically available to officers of her rank. The screen confirmed what Mercer had told her. An unprecedented security clearance elevation had been granted to Admiral Blackwood, specifically regarding files connected to her service record and operational history. The tablet suggested 3 response options, each with significant consequences. Her finger hovered over them, hesitating in a rare moment of uncertainty. Whatever decision she was contemplating remained unmade as the chime announcing the end of lunch break echoed through the hall. When Maridel returned to the auditorium, she found her assigned seat had been changed. Rather than the peripheral position she had occupied that morning, her nameplate now sat prominently at the center table, directly in Admiral Blackwood's line of sight. A calculated move designed to put her in the spotlight, to make her feel exposed. The afternoon session focused on command decisions in crisis situations, with Admiral Blackwood himself leading the discussion. As the lights dimmed slightly for the presentation, Maridel noticed several senior intelligence officers had quietly entered the room, taking positions along the back wall. Not unusual for a classified briefing, perhaps, but their focused attention on her rather than the presentation raised internal alarms. "Our case study this afternoon," Blackwood began, advancing to his first slide, "examines the Strait of Hormuz extraction operation from 3 years ago." The screen displayed a satellite image that caused several officers to shift uncomfortably in their seats. The operation referenced had been classified well above the clearance level of many present. More concerning to Maridel was the specific choice. The details matched almost exactly a mission she had personally designed, though her name appeared nowhere in the official records. She glanced down at her tablet, finding a new message waiting. "Security breach detected. Vigilance protocol escalated." Maridel's fingers hovered over the tablet screen, weighing options that few in the room would understand. The security alert wasn't just a warning, it was a decision point with cascading consequences. She made no selection yet, instead raising her eyes to watch Admiral Blackwood advance through his presentation with the confidence of someone holding all the cards. "This operation succeeded against extraordinary odds," Blackwood continued, his voice carrying practiced authority. "Intelligence predicted a 70% casualty rate for the extraction team. Instead, all personnel returned safely, despite encountering 3 times the expected resistance." The satellite imagery shifted to display heat signatures moving through a narrow strait, small vessels weaving between larger commercial ships. To most observers, it appeared to be standard tactical footage. To Maradel, it was much more personal, a mission she had orchestrated down to the smallest detail, watching from a secure operations center as her carefully designed protocols unfolded exactly as planned. Blackwood moved closer to where Maradel sat, a deliberate invasion of space disguised as casual movement. The extraction team utilized an unconventional approach, abandoning standard naval protocols in favor of what official records describe as an adaptive engagement matrix. He paused meaningfully, looking directly at her. A rather technical term for what amounts to improvisation. A current of tension rippled through the audience. The implied criticism of a successful mission violated unspoken military etiquette, particularly in such a public forum. Several senior officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Commander Hayes!" Blackwood pivoted sharply, his voice projecting to ensure everyone heard. "Your file indicates you were stationed at Pentagon Analysis during this period." All eyes turned to Maradel. The spotlight Blackwood had carefully arranged now focused its full intensity. "Yet, rumors suggest you authored the controversial extraction strategy." His tone made authored sound like fabricated. "Perhaps you could enlighten us on your contribution?" The room fell silent. Even those who had dismissed Maradel earlier now watched with undisguised curiosity. The question wasn't just unusual. It was a deliberate breach of security protocol, raising classified operational details in a mixed clearance setting. "Security protocols prohibit discussion of classified operations, Admiral," Maradel replied, her voice measured and clear, "particularly regarding specific tactical contributions." Blackwood's smile tightened. "Your reluctance suggests either incompetence or overclassification, Commander. Neither serves our Navy well, especially when innovation could benefit our current operational challenges." From the side of the room, Captain Mercer stood. "Admiral, perhaps we should return to the broader strategic lessons rather than specific tactical details." Blackwood's head snapped toward the interruption, eyes narrowing. "Captain Mercer, your input isn't required, unless you share Commander Hayes' mysterious qualifications." Mercer remained standing for one more defiant moment before slowly returning to his seat, the silent exchange communicating volumes to those paying attention. "Now then," Blackwood continued, turning back to Maradel, "the Hormuz operation represents a significant departure from established doctrine. Someone convinced Fleet Command to approve high-risk protocols that violated 6 separate operational guidelines. I'm simply trying to understand the thought process behind such a decision." The attack was no longer veiled. Whatever game Blackwood was playing had escalated to open confrontation. Maradel glanced toward the senior intelligence officers at the back of the room, noting their focused attention and subtle hand movements as they communicated among themselves. "Admiral," she responded carefully, "risk assessment is contextual. What appears to violate guidelines often represents adaptation to specific circumstances that guidelines cannot anticipate." "A convenient perspective," Blackwood replied coldly, "particularly when the individuals making such adaptations aren't the ones risking their lives implementing them." The accusation hung in the air, both inaccurate and impossible for Maradel to correct, without revealing classified information. Several officers who had participated in the operation exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the characterization, but unwilling to contradict a superior officer. Blackwood moved to his next slide, but rather than continuing the case study, he displayed what appeared to be a personnel file. The name was not visible from where most of the audience sat, but Maradel recognized her service photograph in the corner. "Let's clarify Commander Hayes' qualifications for everyone," Blackwood announced, his tone shifting to something approaching mockery. "Since her expertise is being presented as authoritative, it seems appropriate to establish the foundation of that authority." He began reading selectively from the document. 8 years at Pentagon Analysis, limited sea time, no combat decorations of note. Each statement landed like a calculated blow, designed to diminish her standing before her peers. Specialized training in cryptographic systems and information warfare, valuable skills certainly, but hardly the background one expects for designing high-risk extraction operations. The omissions in his summary were more telling than what he included. No mention of her specialized operations training, her field deployments under classified designations, or her rapid advancement through security clearance levels that typically require decades to achieve. Several senior officers looked uncomfortable with this public display, not necessarily because they supported Maridel, but because such open denigration of a fellow officer violated professional norms. Yet none spoke up. Blackwood's rank and political connections created a shield of silence around his actions. Maridel's expression remained neutral, but her posture shifted subtly, shoulders squaring, spine straightening, the unconscious physical preparation of someone anticipating conflict. On her tablet, still angled away from curious eyes, the security notification had evolved. Vigilance Protocol, Level 2, Authorization Required. Below this warning flashed 3 options, each representing a different response to the security breach Blackwood was actively committing. The most severe would lock down all classified information in the room and trigger an immediate counterintelligence response. The middle option would secure only information related to her own operations. The minimum response would simply log the breach for later review. All 3 required her authorization, a remarkable level of autonomy for someone of her rank, and a telling indication of her true position within naval intelligence structures. Commander Hayes has served admirably in her analytical capacity, Blackwood continued, his praise transparently false. But as we evaluate emerging maritime threats, we must be careful to distinguish between theoretical expertise and operational experience. Lives depend on that distinction. He closed the personnel file, and his tone became mockingly conspiratorial. There's an amusing rumor circulating about Commander Hayes that perhaps we should address directly. The abrupt shift sent a new current of tension through the room. Maridel remained still, only her eyes moving as she assessed the rapidly evolving situation. Some suggest she is connected to the mythical Echo 7 operations. Blackwood allowed a small, indulgent smile as scattered laughter rippled through sections of the audience. For those unfamiliar, Echo 7 is supposedly responsible for our most successful covert maritime operations of the past decade, a phantom tactical genius working from the shadows. He paused for effect, his expression making clear his opinion of such notions. A convenient fiction created to obscure joint task force failures and provide cover for operations that bend regulations beyond recognition, like our Hormuz case study. The laughter that followed was uncertain, tempered by the presence of intelligence officers whose expressions remained carefully neutral. Several senior commanders avoided eye contact with either Blackwood or Maridel, suggesting they knew more than they were willing to acknowledge publicly. Maridel's eyes found Captain Mercer across the room. His face revealed nothing, but he gave her an almost imperceptible nod, a silent communication in a room full of spoken words that revealed far less. She tapped a specific sequence on her tablet, confirming a decision whose consequences were known only to her. The screen responded immediately. Vigilance Protocol Authorized. A subtle shift occurred in the room's lighting, so slight that most present likely attributed it to imagination. But the digital screens around the auditorium flickered momentarily, cycling through a reset that lasted less than half a second. Maridel noted that the intelligence officers at the back straightened almost in unison, hands moving to their secure devices as alerts presumably reached them. Blackwood, focused on his audience, noticed none of this. His confidence growing with each unanswered challenge, he moved from behind the podium and approached Maridel directly, stopping just a few feet from where she sat. "So, tell us, Commander." His voice dropped to a near whisper that nevertheless carried in the silent room, each word dripping with condescension. "Who exactly is Echo 7? The question hung in the air, a challenge designed to force either an admission or a denial, either of which would damage her credibility in different ways. The room went completely silent, all eyes on Maridel as she began to rise from her seat, her movement deliberate and controlled. Before she could speak, the room's lighting shifted perceptibly. Every digital screen in the auditorium simultaneously flashed blue, then stabilized with a Navy insignia that few present had seen before, a specialized security division emblem normally reserved for compartmentalized intelligence operations. A secure communication channel opened through the auditorium speakers, the standard tone indicating a priority override that bypassed normal communication protocols. Secure channel established. The computerized voice was feminine, but clearly artificial. Clearance level, ultraviolet. Murmurs spread through the audience. Most had never heard of this classification level, officially 2 tiers above top secret. Admiral Blackwood's confident expression faltered as he glanced at the screens, then back at Meridel, whose calm demeanor had not changed despite the dramatic interruption. The most visible reaction came from Blackwood's security badge, which began flashing red, the universal signal for a security clearance being actively revoked. He looked down at it in confusion, then back at Meridel with dawning comprehension. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, but his voice had lost its authoritative edge. Meridel remained silent, her eyes never leaving his, as the computerized voice continued with chilling finality. Echo 7 online. The first classified operation log appeared on screen, its heading clearly visible to everyone in the room. Operation Poseidon's Shadow. The document bore an authentication code in the corner, E7, alongside Meridel's digital signature. More logs began populating all screens throughout the auditorium, creating a visual catalog of operations spanning nearly a decade. Operations that had saved hundreds of lives, prevented multiple international incidents, and shaped naval strategy in ways few present had realized. The room erupted in shocked whispers as the implications became clear. Blackwood's face drained of color, his security badge continuing its urgent red flashing. "This is impossible," he stammered, looking from the screens to Meridel. "You can't possibly be—" "Security breach detected," the computerized voice interrupted. "Containment protocol initiated." 2 security personnel who had been standing unobtrusively near the exits now moved with practiced efficiency toward Admiral Blackwood. Their expressions were professionally neutral, but their purpose was unmistakable. "Admiral Thorsten Blackwood," the computerized voice announced to the entire room. "Security clearance revoked by Central Command. Please surrender your credentials and accompany security personnel." Blackwood stood frozen, the public humiliation rendering him momentarily speechless. His gaze returned to Meridel, who had not moved, had not spoken, had not betrayed any emotion throughout the entire exchange. But in her eyes was something new, a quiet intensity that communicated more than words ever could. The Admiral had sought to expose and humiliate an officer he perceived as a threat to his authority. Instead, he had triggered the revelation of a classified identity that would fundamentally rewrite the power dynamics of the entire naval command structure. As the security personnel reached him, Blackwood finally found his voice, though it had lost all its previous confidence. "On whose authority is my clearance being revoked?" Rather than answering directly, the computerized voice made an announcement that silenced the entire room. "Commander Meridel Hayes, identity confirmed as Echo 7. Security protocol initiated due to unauthorized disclosure attempt." Every eye in the auditorium turned to Meridel, seeing her as if for the first time. The unassuming commander with minimal decorations now stood revealed as the architect of operations many present had studied, implemented, or received commendations for, without ever knowing their true source. The screens continued displaying mission logs in sequential order, each bearing her authentication code. The evidence was undeniable, the revelation absolute. The mythical Echo 7 was not a department, not a task force, not a convenient fiction, but a single officer who had shaped naval special operations for nearly a decade while hiding in plain sight. The auditorium remained frozen in a tableau of collective shock. Security personnel flanked Admiral Blackwood, whose face had gone from confident to ashen in the space of 90 seconds. The screens surrounding the room continued their relentless display of classified operation logs, each bearing the authentication code E7, alongside Meridel Hayes' digital signature. Operations spanning 7 years across 12 maritime regions, involving every major naval crisis of the past decade. "This is a mistake," Blackwood managed finally, his voice hollow. "These operations were joint task force initiatives. No single officer could have authorized or designed them all." The computerized voice responded with algorithmic precision, displaying operational attribution verification. New information cascaded across the screens, planning documents, tactical assessments, after-action reports. Each highlighted Meridel's unique operational signature, a specific approach to asymmetric threats that was as distinctive as a fingerprint to those who knew what to look for. a hostage extraction with 0 casualties when 65% losses were expected, a submarine rescue beneath Arctic ice that saved 118 sailors, a counter-terrorism operation that prevented an attack on a carrier group, each mission previously attributed to different departments or joint task forces, all actually designed and often personally led by the unassuming commander who still hadn't spoken a word since the revelation began. Most striking to the assembled officers was a mission from 2 years prior, a high-profile rescue operation in the South China Sea, for which Admiral Blackwood himself had received a commendation. The screens now displayed the original operational design bearing Meridell's authentication code, followed by the modified version submitted under Blackwood's authority with only cosmetic changes. The Admiral's security badge continued its urgent red pulsing as he stared at the evidence of his own deception displayed for all to see. When he turned back toward Meridell, the confident condescension had been replaced by naked fear. "You can't do this," he said, his voice barely audible. "You don't have the authority." "Correction," the computerized voice interjected. Echo 7 protocols authorize autonomous security response to Level 3 breaches of compartmentalized intelligence. Admiral Blackwood's actions constitute a Level 4 breach. The security personnel moved closer to the Admiral, their purpose clear. One reached for the flashing badge, removing it from Blackwood's uniform with practiced efficiency. The symbolic stripping of authority happened in full view of the assembled naval command, a public humiliation far beyond what Blackwood had attempted to inflict on Meridell. The silence that had gripped the room finally broke as Vice Admiral Katsumi Washiro rose slowly from his seat in the front row. As the second highest-ranking naval officer present and respected for his unimpeachable integrity, his movement drew all eyes. "Commander Hayes," his voice cut through the tension with calm authority, "it appears an apology is in order." He approached Meridell as the security personnel escorted a shell-shocked Blackwood toward the exit. The room watched in collective disbelief as Washiro stopped before her and rendered a formal salute, a stunning gesture from an officer of his rank to a commander. "Your service has been beyond what most of us could comprehend," he said, holding the salute until Meridell returned it with precise military form. The gesture broke a dam of sorts. Other officers throughout the auditorium stood, following Washiro's lead in a wave of recognition. Men and women who had barely acknowledged Meridell's presence hours before now stood at attention, saluting not just her rank, but the revealed truth of her service. Meridell accepted this unprecedented acknowledgement with the same composed demeanor she had maintained throughout the confrontation. No triumph, no vindication, just quiet professionalism that somehow made the moment more powerful. Admiral Washiro turned to address the room. "I believe we all have some adjusting to do regarding our understanding of naval intelligence operations." He gestured toward the screens still displaying mission logs. "And perhaps our assumptions about who designs them." He turned back to Meridell. "Perhaps Commander Hayes, Echo 7, might share what she can about her work." The invitation hung in the air as Meridell considered it. Finally, she moved toward the podium, her steps measured and deliberate. The room fell silent again, every person present aware they were witnessing something historic. 8 years ago, she began, her voice clear but conversational, I identified a pattern of strategic gaps in our maritime response capabilities. No dramatic introduction, no self-aggrandizement, just facts presented with precision. These gaps weren't in our hardware or personnel, but in our operational frameworks. Our doctrine had evolved to handle conventional threats effectively, but left us vulnerable to hybrid attacks that leveraged both kinetic and non-kinetic vectors. She spoke without notes, without visual aids beyond the operation logs still visible on the surrounding screens. Her expertise flowed naturally, revealing a depth of knowledge that explained how she had designed operations that saved hundreds of lives. Rather than navigating multiple layers of bureaucracy to implement new protocols, I developed an adaptive framework that could be rapidly deployed when standard approaches proved insufficient. Her explanation continued, outlining the methodology behind what had become known as the Echo 7 protocols, named not for her, she explained, but for the 7 core principles of adaptive response that formed their foundation. These became the Echo 7 framework, adaptive, deniable, and effective. The operational security measures weren't designed to create mythology, but to protect the framework itself from compromise. As she spoke, the audience's perception visibly shifted. The unassuming commander they had dismissed now commanded their complete attention, her quiet authority more compelling than Blackwood's artificial bluster had ever been. Recognition creates vulnerabilities, she concluded. Results provide security. That's why Echo 7 remained compartmentalized, not to build mystique, but to maintain operational effectiveness. Her words were measured, professional, but carried unmistakable authority. She had designed operations that changed the course of naval history, saved countless lives, and shaped international relations, all while remaining invisible to the very people who implemented her strategies. When she finished speaking, the silence that followed was different from before, not shocked or confused, but reflective. Admiral Washiro was the first to respond. "Thank you, Commander." He addressed both Meridel and the room. "I believe we all have a new appreciation for the phrase quiet professional." As the formal symposium concluded, the atmosphere had transformed completely. Officers who had previously ignored Meridel now attempted to speak with her, some offering congratulations, others simply trying to process the revelation by proximity. She responded to each courteously but briefly, accepting their recognition without encouraging it. Captain Mercer finally made his way through the crowd to her side. "Well," he said quietly, "that wasn't how we planned your introduction to the Admiralty." A hint of a smile touched Meridel's lips. "No plan survives first contact." "Was the vigilance protocol necessary?" Mercer asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. "It wasn't about protecting me," Meridel replied, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "It was about protecting the operations, and the people who carried them out." Mercer nodded, understanding the distinction. He had been her first commanding officer years earlier, one of the few who recognized her potential when others saw only an unremarkable junior officer. "They're going to try to put you on a stage now, medals, promotions, the works." "That would rather defeat the purpose," she observed. "Indeed it would." He glanced toward Admiral Washiro, who was making his way toward them through the dispersing crowd. "Fair warning, I think the Vice Admiral has plans for you." Mercer excused himself as Washiro reached them. The senior officer gestured toward a side door. "Commander Hayes, might I have a word in private?" The small conference room adjacent to the auditorium offered a stark contrast to the grandeur they had just left. Utilitarian furnishings, no windows, secure communications equipment built into the walls. As the door closed behind them, Washiro's formal demeanor relaxed slightly. "Blackwood's political connections run deep," he said without preamble. "There will be consequences for what happened today." "I'm aware," Meridel replied. "Naval intelligence is prepared to officially acknowledge your role. Full promotion to captain, public recognition of your contributions, assignment to lead a new tactical development division." He paused, studying her reaction. "Or, alternative arrangements can be made, if you prefer." The offer represented everything most naval officers spent careers pursuing: advancement, recognition, authority. Meridel considered it with the same careful assessment she brought to operational planning. "Echo 7 was effective because nobody was looking for me," she said finally. "Public recognition would compromise that effectiveness." Washiro nodded, unsurprised. "The Navy needs commanders who can lead from the front, but perhaps it needs ghosts even more." He removed a small, unmarked tablet from his jacket and placed it on the table between them. "This contains the preliminary briefing for an emerging situation in the Indonesian archipelago, multiple hostage scenarios developing simultaneously across 15 islands. Conventional response would require carrier group deployment that would escalate regional tensions." Meridel picked up the device, already scanning the information with practiced efficiency. "This one needs Echo 7's touch," Washiro said quietly. "If you're willing." Her answer was a single nod, all that was needed between professionals who understood the weight of such decisions. 1 month later, Meridel boarded a Virginia-class submarine at Naval Base Point Loma, dressed in civilian clothes. With minimal identification, a junior officer met her at the gangway, snapping to attention. "Commander Hayes, welcome aboard the USS Montana." She corrected him gently. "Just consultant will do, Lieutenant." "Yes, ma'am," he replied, escorting her through the narrow passages to the command center, where Captain Eliana Reeves waited. The captain greeted her with simple professionalism. Welcome aboard. Your equipment has been installed per specifications. No grand announcements or ceremony, just quiet acknowledgement of her presence and purpose. As the crew prepared for departure, Captain Reeves added quietly, "We're honored to have Echo 7 with us." Maridel glanced at the mission briefing displayed on the tactical station, already identifying improvements to the preliminary plan. "The honor is mine," she replied. "Now, let's get to work." The submarine slipped beneath the surface of the Pacific an hour later, vanishing into the depths with its extraordinary passenger. In the Maritime Operations Center thousands of miles away, a single designation appeared on the secure tracking system. E7 deployed. 6 months after the symposium incident, a new class of midshipmen gathered at the Naval Academy for their advanced strategy course. Commander Farron Althouse, the lead instructor, referenced a case study on the screen before them. "Today we're examining the Echo 7 protocols for asymmetric maritime response," he explained. "These approaches have been formally integrated into naval doctrine as of this year, representing a significant evolution in our tactical thinking." The presentation contained no mention of Maridel by name, only the methodologies she had created. The midshipmen took careful notes, unaware they were learning principles developed by a single officer rather than a specialized task force. At the conclusion of the lecture, Althouse gestured toward a wall of the classroom where a new installation had been placed, a simple plaque listing naval intelligence innovators throughout history. Among the dozens of names and initials added recently and positioned at the center were the letters M.O.H., just 2 initials among many, yet somehow drawing the eye through positioning alone. "Remember," Althouse told the class as they prepared to depart, "the most effective leaders aren't always the most visible. True service often happens in the spaces between what we see and what we know." The midshipmen filed out, focused on their next classes and assignments. None noticed the plaque's subtle illumination, designed to catch light in a way that made those central initials appear to glow when viewed from certain angles. In every organization, there are those who lead from the shadows. Their greatest achievements remain classified, their sacrifices unknown. Not because recognition isn't deserved, but because the mission comes first. They shape history without appearing in its pages, their impact felt but rarely acknowledged. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition but deserved more than anyone else? They move through our world quietly, changing it in ways we may never fully understand. Their stories may never make headlines, but they change the world nonetheless.